ready? We ready? Okay, we're going to move back into regular session. Having had an executive session, do we have a motion on the floor concerning construction manager?
So moved. I'd like to recommend that we have O&G AP as our construction manager.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
So the process, Rusty, for doing the contract, and the time frame for completing that construction.
We know which contract it is. I will talk to Katie and she can start that forward.
She'll be back Wednesday.
Okay, well, that'll be fine because we're having a meeting on Wednesday with the architect and the construction manager to lay out their roles and clarify some of this type of stuff and just make sure we're off on the right foot and everybody knows their scope of work. So I will kick that off. I may even call the lawyer and just say
Over
you can
at
yeah.
Bricker. Will we start talking about, well, I guess we can't talk about scheduling until we figure out what our site plan, what our plan is, right?
That's the key.
Whether we go phasing
Talk to Chuck
or
about
straight.
Yes.
The state?
Yes.
You got to get the state down here.
So
That's the next
Go-
part of it.
yep.
Why don't you go right into that?
Yeah. So he spoke to Chuck. He said the bottom line is they don't need to visit the site before submission of our grant process. He said, and I doubt they will based on the schedule up there. He was up there this week.
But wait a minute. If we submit a grant and don't know whether the school can be rebuilt or,
Well, that's the question I asked.
Yeah.
That's a question I pushed back on him. I said, but he said, continue with what you're doing. He hasn't emailed me back. He did say Michelle Dixon, who's part of Costas's office, said, I spoke to Michelle Dixon specifically on the Darien space standard issue. He said they're looking at your district a little differently. It appears they're willing to allow your space standard to vary a bit more as they know the district takes good care of their buildings. He said, so this is the start of the conversation around the space standards and the size of the school. So,
but I mean, I thought one of the critical starting decisions was whether we were allowed to rebuild, to build new or renovate.
that's what I pushed back and asked him.
We're not, I mean, we won't have an answer by the time we file.
No, I'm hoping he sends me back an email today and states, how does that play into what we're doing?
Yeah, okay.
I said, we're going down the path of building new.
Correct.
So the question was, he comes down to look at the site to say like, okay, I agree with new or I agree with renovation. So he hasn't responded yet.
We're going to have the architect start the programming
Yeah.
work for Diane is on Wednesday. Even though we don't have a contract, they're the presumptive architect.
Yeah.
And make it clear that we need some type of rendering based on what we give them with this, and I would say new. And I think everyone will agree that we should try to do this as a one-phase project and not two, or one plus a nibble, or one project.
I think what I've heard so far is that a phase project would be a one-year delay in completion.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that,
And an increase in cost.
Well, a definite increase in
Substantial
cost.
increase in cost.
right, and I'm not sure that either the Board of Education or the parents or the students really would want another year's delay.
Well, I think in terms of like parents, students, staff, the question about the phasing really would be how much earlier does that get a certain population into the school? Because it wouldn't just be an added year before anyone's in the new school. It would be certain parts of the school would be new, which would
Right.
actually probably be earlier than if it weren't phased. It just wouldn't be the complete set of people.
Would it be earlier? Would we get anything earlier than a single phase? Would we, I mean, if you did a two-phase approach. Would you have people in the new part of the school, before you'd have a single-phase
Be about
project?
the same.
Yeah, it could
You
be
don't think
like,
there would be any time saving?
maybe a 6 months difference, something like that.
Probably not even.
I don't think it was a whole school year, though.
In addition, even if you did, you would then have children in a construction site
Longer.
longer,
Right.
which would cause
Problem.
certain planning issues on our end, which will go with what your decision is, but it is a complicated situation.
Well, apparently, I mean, they're gonna be losing playground space for a period of time, no matter which way we go. So that would be extended.
Right.
Well, we'll get to that.
Parking.
I think we'll get to that.
One other thing that comes into play is we need some guidance as to whether we can have a separate ELP building,
Yeah,
because that would make a whole lot of difference to this.
yeah.
And I think that's where the architect needs to come in and begin the programming work and sit down with the Board of Education and really go through whether the town supports
So
looking
my
at.
belief is that would be an ed spec change, so that's exactly what we would need to happen. We need to talk to the architect and understand it, because I would need the board to vote on that spec change.
Right.
I think my understanding, and not speaking for everyone, but representing them, whatever is the best plan, we're more than willing to consider that meets the needs, and whether that's attached or singular, the board would just have to hear the replies to understand how to make that decision. But
But I
we're
think
more than
that-
happy to any point to be convened and ready to meet and/or talk to an architect in order to keep it moving.
You've seen the preliminary ideas.
I have, because I've seen it from Duke. I would just
Right.
need to present it to everyone.
No, and we're not saying anyone is, we're checking off anyone. We're just sort of saying it was an interesting idea, having a totally separate ELP campus just for ELP people.
And then there's also, as Rusty suggested, there's something that's in between, kind of phasing. It's like half the school, for example, a separate ELP, potentially removal of a part of an existing school, a classroom or two, in order to provide a larger site for the new construction, which would also be something that I think is important to discuss, because we certainly did find on the other end that the parameters as laid out, the existing zoning, the existing program, it's very tight in the location that's been given. And I think long-term, we do a disservice to the school if we tried to put both the elementary school and the ELP into that space, leaving the existing school entirely intact and working within just those parameters. And we heard that from all three architects, that they could do that, but they would rather not from a design point of view. They don't feel we're getting long-term the best school. So I think that's why we're sort of feeling the need to look at alternatives, ways of taking a little bit more space, be it the playground behind the school for a separate building, taking a little piece of the existing school, or phasing it. I think that's why those conversations came up.
So if there are specific questions and you want to get them to Duke, we can sit down with Mike Lynch and Dr. Land and then present to the board and let you know kind of what leeways within inside of ed specs we can provide that might be helpful, and then the design is on.
And we need to sit down with the architect and the
Right.
construction manager and just let's get going on the process, guys, and let's focus on those questions that you brought up. And you, the architect, were not the only one who brought up those questions
Yeah.
about the constraints in that space.
But I think
We'll make ourselves-
the initial theme is, to your point, I think you said it well, is in order to do the right thing for the space,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to look at some type of phasing concept, whether it's partial, couple of classrooms aside of a building, and I think incorporated into that is just, how does ELP stand on its own or not?
Exactly.
And what are the pros and cons
Okay.
about that, which will.
Yeah.
Later on, we can talk to them on Wednesday about that.
So, anything else to report from our
So he's
state?
got so far what we have, he's got the enrollment study. We're working through the checklist, and so he'll be part of the meeting next week also.
As everybody probably now knows, the RTM meeting on June 10th is where we're going to ask for the full appropriation in order to meet the state grant requirement that we have a fully appropriated amount for this school project. The amount that's going to be asked for, we've already asked for $3 million for the architect and engineering and other costs. It's going to be an additional $60 million to make a total of $63 million. We recognize that this is a high, very high estimate, and we're obviously hoping to come in much lower, but want to give ourselves that room of protection in case there's some catastrophic thing that happens, or material escalation in prices due to maybe tariffs or whatever going in place. And we don't want to come, the idea is to under-promise and over-perform, so we want to ask for more and come in at a better number. But in order to do that, to go before the RTM on June 10th, we have to go before the two relevant, or whoever the rules committee of the RTM assigns to look at this project, most likely finance and budgeting and the education committee. So one of the ideas that's been popped, and we have to go to the rules committee to ask them to put it on the agenda, I'm backing up, next Monday. I thought about putting together some information for them, just than merely a resolution asking for $60 million more. So to give them something to have to give to their committees, but the idea has come back, and I have to talk with Jamie Stevenson and other people about it. It's whether we make a presentation on June 3rd, that is at our Board of Selectmen meeting, and invite the two relevant RTM committees to our meeting and make the presentation on the project, where we stand, what we're trying to get done, and why we're asking for a total of $63 million. They in turn, and then it would, by that time, we'd have a fair amount of, hard data to give them, follow-ups and stuff. And then, but I would ask that if we do it that way, and I don't know if that's what we're finally going to do, that the committee make every effort to be at that presentation, because we'll do it here with a screen and in front of everybody. And then the two RTM committees would then adjourn and go have their meetings to further discuss it, so that everything hopefully would be prepared for the June 10th RTM presentation. So that's the tentative schedule. I'll make sure everybody knows about that as soon as I can firm that up. It seems like it might work. I don't know.
Picture's worth 1,000 words.
Well, you do a
PowerPoints.
couple slides, and people see it, they don't, and we go just tell them what our process has been, and it's,
I think it's also important from a PR point of view, frankly, because there's a lot of misinformation out there as to where we are in the process, what are we doing.
Yeah.
This would help that.
And you'll be away.
I'll be away, but next week we can work
I know.
on whatever you need.
Would you want the architect to be present at that meeting?
I don't know if that's necessary at this stage. I mean, it certainly is going to be essentially important for them when you're talking to the school and the faculty and all those people, hear from them. But I'm not sure that we want to have all those
Probably
characters
not.
at this meeting.
If they're there, they'll get asked questions.
Yeah, and it's so early in the project.
Yeah, really early.
Yeah.
So I just want people to be aware of that. I will be back to you as quickly as I know. After this meeting, I'm going to ask some questions to find out where we're going to go on that. But that's sort of what the progress is. So next Monday, we go to the Rules Committee to ask for, to put it on the agenda for the June 10th RTM meeting. Yeah.
So how much detail are you going to go into there, or do you need to go into?
We all have to talk about that. I think we should.
Okay.
I think we should highlight sort of the key things that we've done.
Right.
The point is to give people a sense of confidence that we're doing our homework, that we're being smart about this, we're being careful about this, and that we are doing a lot of work to get to an optimal position right now. And the only reason, I think part of it also, Duke, is to tell them, here's the normal process we'd like to do a project.
Right.
But here's why we have to do it totally different.
Right.
At least at the start.
And here's the impact if we don't.
If we don't, exactly. It's sort of that kind of thing, so that everyone can understand why we're doing this, why we're putting up this big estimate so early. Okay.
So that's Monday, the 27th, is May 27th, that's the Rules Committee?
No,
This coming
this coming
Monday.
Monday, May 20th.
Oh, May 20th, oh, yeah.
And we already have the resolution in place, because after we talked yesterday, Kate put it together at a total of 63 million. And then the question is whether at the Board of Selectmen meeting on June 3rd, will we make this presentation to all the group assembled, and they can go off and do their work with the final presentation to the RTM on June 10th. Okay?
I think it makes a ton of sense, because the challenge sometimes, even going through a normal budget process, is you're making the same presentation 2-3 times. Whereas if we can make it once, then.
And we might want to
get
refine it
questions.
from that. We might find a couple of things we refine.
We'll live and learn what they're looking for,
Exactly.
what they're interested in, and then we can continue to develop that presentation, so.
We did this with the garage project.
Yeah.
And all the work we did in advance of making the presentation turned out to be helpful, because yes, there were some questions. People were wondering, well, why don't you just, avoid all the FEMA problems you have by doing it in phases? Well, you can't get around FEMA if you try to spread your cost over 3 years, because FEMA says I'm on a 3-year number. The typical questions. At the end of the day, I think people had confidence that we were going to do it right, and the end result is we did, and we brought it in early and under budget. Is there any other matters we want to discuss today?
Just a couple of quick things. I was a little concerned with some of these, that they had a 25-foot parking setback space. So I talked to the fire marshal's office and Jeremy, and we don't have to. That's the bottom line. So we're trying to squeeze these two areas down, particularly around the open space. We can go to 10 feet or 8 feet. Or
For emergency purposes?
They don't need to be all around the school. That was the key.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and they weren't all around the school, in the high school and some of the other projects, the police department. But because we're dealing, 1 or 2 feet is important to us.
Yeah.
That now we can go pretty tight on those.
That's good.
On that side.
Okay.
Does Mike want to chat, say anything about the P&Z meeting?
Sure. So to the farmers or to Jeremy? I just have to get my note here. Yeah, in terms of P&Z, the municipal zone obviously came up as an agenda item there. And, I think what was interesting is Bruce Hill was there. He's a retired lawyer. And he commented on the history of the municipal zone, how it was used at the library, how it was used at the police station, and how he represented the town for the housing authority on the Old Town Home. And then, the contrast was, keep a floating zone and the setbacks. I think what was interesting, I shared this with Rusty just very briefly, there is misinformation about where the project is related to site, not related to all the good work that's been going on. So I actually spoke to the committee and said, we've selected an architect, but not contracted yet. We have not, finalized anything in terms of the site plan, the phasing strategy, or anything associated with that. And, I think that misnomer is maybe attributed just kind of to the whole coincidence of the municipal zone and the starting of our project. But, there's confusion by the commission as well as the neighbors, so it wasn't one or the other. So I think to a point, Rusty, that you mentioned quite a while ago, we should now develop that, get the neighbors on board with where things are headed, or as we get information. But the public hearing was closed, and they will start deliberations on the 28th with regards to.
For the MU zone?
For the MU zone.
Oh, okay.
And that's for the regulation changes as
Right.
well as the map change. And I think, as Tip knows well, there's not a limitation to the time associated with making a decision. So that puts us in this precarious position. Any other application, we would know the answer in 65 days.
Which is, that's a requirement.
As a requirement.
Right.
The town, if it makes an application does not have that obligation, so they can take as much time as would be necessary.
Could you use your legendary influence to try to prod that along?
Oh, boy, I've got so much influence. Whatever I had, I think is being quickly lost. Well,
I mean, I just add, in terms of influence, it's interesting, from my standpoint, there's opposition in terms of where the building is positioned forward, and then one of the board members, Jim Rand, is on the commission.
Yeah, he
There's
lives right behind.
jokes about it being further from his property. So it's interesting, Jim Rand is on the board. I'm not speaking out of turn, it's public knowledge, and he's also in a butter.
he definitely isn't a butter.
I'll kind of leave
Yeah.
that. Right,
Further
so
comments
I don't know
necessary.
what that means in terms of decision, but he is in a butter as well, and he's on the commission.
Interesting.
He didn't comment too much, although one joke about proximity to the school to his home.
Be interesting whether he recuses himself
I don't,
from the vote.
You'd better.
Yeah, I know. Any other business?
Yes, I just want to report that we're going to receive the contract hopefully today from SLAM and begin negotiating that with the architects. So hopefully that will be worked out in the next week or so.
Great. As far as our next meeting, is it too early to say when we should actually meet again? I know that I hope you'll all be present at the June 3rd presentation. I know you won't really, but,
Is that at 7:30?
Pardon?
Will that be 7:30?
In the evening?
Mm-hmm.
It'll be 7.
7, okay, thank
The
you.
Board of Selectmen usually starts at 7.
7, thank you.
Yeah, I'll make sure everything gets noticed. So, I mean, I don't think, we'll be at a meeting there? No, we're just going to be there at present? Just present.
Present.
Okay. So we'll leave the next meeting date open for right now. Okay? Any other business? Hearing none, is motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Bye.
Thanks all.